Hello everybody, Shinjo here, welcome back to the channel, and we are really close to Pokemon Day once again. At the moment, I don't know if there's going to be a present, how long it's going to be, when it's going to be, all the details on it. Obviously, if you keep up with leaks and stuff of the sort, you probably have an idea of what's happening, but I'm not that type of person. But regardless, whether we get information on Legends ZA or any future games or even spin-offs this year, it is around this time that I'm really happy to be a Pokemon fan. But the problem always comes up with every year that I've done videos like this on the channel. What Pokemon content do I make this time? Because I've made multiple videos discussing starter Pokemon, champions, pseudo-legendaries, basically anything that you could think about when it comes to Pokemon. So that's where today's topic comes in. I did discuss my top 10 Pokemon of each generation and then overall a little while ago, but first of all, that video is really outdated, and even the top 10 Paldea video that I made, I recorded soon after the games came out. Plus, the biggest factor in all of this, no matter if it's a week, a month, a year, my tastes are always changing. My favorite Pokemon one week could be not a Pokemon that I really care much for a week after. But I will say that my favorites are really consistent over each gen. Although this video was a completely different topic when I initially thought it up. My plan was to discuss good Pokemon from Generation 6 all the way through Generation 9, mainly because everybody clowns on the recent generations, especially after it goes into 3D. But then I realized if I'm doing that, I might as well discuss good Pokemon from each generation. And that's where today's video comes in. My top 3 Pokemon of each generation. There are some stipulations that I made mainly for myself when making this list. First of all, there's not going to be any gimmicks on here. There's not going to be any Alolan forms, Galarian forms, Hisuian forms, no Gigantamaxes, Mega Evolutions, no extra forms or anything like that. Because I feel like overall, if I like a Pokemon like Hisuian Zoroark, then I'm going to like regular Zoroark anyway for the most part. And also, while it doesn't really matter with the list overall, I did try to steer clear of having every Pokemon be part of a list. For example, with 3 Pokemon in each generation, I could have each one be the starter trio of each generation, or even double up on pseudos from Hoenn. I mainly did that to make my list at least a little bit differently than other people's lists. These Pokemon are really in no particular order. Honestly, I couldn't rank them even if I wanted for some groups. But I'm not going to waste too much time because we have 9 generations to go through. And we're starting off with good old Kanto, and here are my 3 from Kanto. I feel like if you've seen any of my videos, Poliwhirl on the list shouldn't be that big of a surprise. But honestly, the more I think about it, the more I really like Jigglypuff. It's just a mon that's really memorable and really adorable. Plus, it's a Pokemon that's honestly stood the test of time without very many gimmicks. And then Scyther, I don't know exactly what you can say about Scyther. He's got blades for hands, that is just really sick. I was considering putting Kabutops on here as well, because he has blade hands too, but I just really like Scyther. He's honestly one of the unsung heroes of the Generation 1 games, in my opinion. But I don't want to keep you guys too long on Generation 1, so let's move on to Generation 2 with my 3 favorites. I'm noticing that it's very concerning that I'm picking a lot of bugs early on, which is weird because bugs weren't really super viable early on. But my first game was Pokemon Silver, my first starter was Totodile, so those 2 are easy picks to choose. And Yanma, I just really like Yanma. It may have also been that around the time Generation 2 came out, was around the time I was in 2nd grade, roughly around there, and when I got glasses, so seeing Yanma looking like he wears glasses is really cool. Plus, I do remember looking around for Yanma in the grass on top of Goldenrod, and in Gold and Silver, Pokemon can flee from you. Now, I believe that it's based off a speed stat, which makes sense for Yanma. Whether Yanma actually exists there, or if it's just a Mandela effect on my part, I'm not sure. But I just really like Yanma. Again, kind of like Scyther, while I wouldn't say he's an unsung hero of the generation, it's a Mon that I wish was better. And unfortunately, it took until Generation 4 for him to get some recognition. Now, Generation 3 is where things get interesting, because where Generation 1 has the nostalgia factor, Generation 2 being the first games that I played, I wouldn't say that it's a real quick decision on my favorite Pokemon of Generation 3. But at the moment, here is what I went with. Like Totodile before, Mudkip I'm pretty sure was the first starter that I picked. Plus, it's Mudkip. How can you not like Mudkip? And while I do want to be contrarian and say Flygon isn't really as cool as what people make it out to be, let's be real, he is. While I will say that I like Altaria as well, I do think Flygon just looks really cool. And that may have been from the Jirachi movie that featured it prominently, but Flygon just looks really cool. And then Deoxys, it's Deoxys. Honestly, I don't know many people that would outright say that they don't like Deoxys. It's just Deoxys. It's an iconic Pokemon, it's really cool. And I will say, even though the speed form is cool as well, I do still think that the base form of Deoxys is my favorite. Now, while we have Generation 3, where it was a little bit difficult for me to make my decision, Generation 4 was really difficult in another way. Because there are so many Pokemon I love from Generation 4. Not even counting the new evolutions given. But I'm not going to keep you in suspense. Here are my 3. I feel like anybody that would look at my channel will be able to figure out that Infernape was going to be here. And I did want to have some representation of the cross-gen evolutions from Gen 4. And I do really like Gallade. Kind of like Scyther, he's got the blades, and that just looks really sick. And while I initially put Floatzel on here instead of Buizel, I do still think the fact that Ash never evolved his Buizel, and its draw with Lucario in the 3rd gym, just made it super memorable to me. While I will say overall, 9 times out of 10, I do prefer the final evolution of a Pokemon rather than the base form. Buizel's a rare situation where I prefer the base form rather than the fully evolved Mon. Now for Gen 5, while there are a lot of Pokemon that people give flack for, there are honestly a lot of really cool designs. And at the moment, the 3 I'm choosing are these. I knew that Excadrill was going to be here. He's just really cool. Irises is really terrifying. Ground Steel is a really cool typing. And Crocodile, honestly, I think he may be my favorite of the entire Generation 5 decks. It's really up there with Excadrill. I think the only thing that I'm not the hugest fan on Crocodile with is the fact that it changes to a red color rather than brown. I feel like if it would have stayed brown like its 2 previous forms, it would have been really cool in my opinion. But I do still like the red as well. And like I mentioned with Scyther, Zebstrika is honestly an unsung hero of Generation 5. It's a really sick design, and where we have people that constantly talk about we need a dolphin Pokemon, we need a flamingo Pokemon, nobody ever recognizes that we have a zebra Pokemon. And it's a really sick design as well. I really wish Zebstrika was better competitively, but I never hear people talking about how Zebstrika tops the charts on the Pokemon competitive scene. But for all the flack that people give Pokemon like Vanillite or Trubbish, which I think are really cool designs as well, there are really, really sick designs from Generation 5 that definitely need more appreciation. And then we move over to Generation 6. Up to this point, I believe it's the smallest decks of all. Maybe second to Johto. And you would think with the smaller decks, it may be a little bit easier to pick my 3. And in a way it is. So here they are. Hawlucha is a really cool Pokemon, and the first flying fighting type up to this point, and honestly, flying fighting has never disappointed. Halucha's cool, Flamigo's cool, he's just really cool, and the fact that he has a move that does 2 different types of damage, I still don't know exactly how it works, but he's just really cool. And of course, Frogadier, like Hawlucha, both were featured on Ash's XY team, so that may be why they're here. And yeah, I may be putting Frogadier on here instead of Greninja because I don't want to give Greninja attention. But in a way, I do still think Frogadier is cooler than Greninja. While Greninja is cool, the tongue scarf is a little bit jarring to me. But then you have the big boy of Generation 6, good old Tyrantrum. It took 6 gens to get a dinosaur T-Rex, and he is really cool. He may be a little bit slow in the speed department, but he's really cool either way. And while I did talk about competitive prowess with a couple of these, I do still think that it doesn't necessarily matter if the design rocks like Tyrantrum does. Moving on to Generation 7, we have a whole plethora of bugs. I do still think, even now, and probably back then, Golisopod and Ribombee are the peak of bug Pokemon. Although granted, they didn't really have much to write home about before, but Golisopod is absolutely sick, a great typing, although its ability does hinder it a little bit. I do still think that the design looking so menacing makes up for it. And Ribombee, it's just adorable. I fell in love with this thing the instant that I saw it in the trailer. And the fact that it's a bug fairy, which is a really cool typing that I don't think was done up to this point and even since then, it's just really adorable. And much like Totodile, much like Mudkip before, Popplio was the Pokemon that I was rooting for picking at the very start of the generation. And while I will say that Litten and Rowlet have grown on me, I do still think Popplio is my favorite of the 3. Does he look a little bit goofy? Maybe, but Totodile looks a little bit goofy as well, so that's not really a fair argument. Now we're getting really close to modern generations, but first, Generation 8, we have these 3. I honestly feel really bad because what I did is I wrote down a list of Pokemon that I want to include before even looking at the dexes, and I feel so bad that I forgot about Hattrem. Next to Ribombee, it's one of those cute Pokemon that I really enjoy. I really don't know what it is about it, but Hatena's adorable. Hatterene, while it's a bit kind of out there in the sort of weird, creepy fandoms like Gardevoir is, Hattrem is just really cool. And the fact that its Pokédex entries basically say it's gonna beat you up if they sense any emotion is just really hilarious and cute to me. And while I will say that the Gen 8 starters aren't exactly my cup of tea, I think Scorbunny is still my favorite of all of them. Reboot is really cool as well, but I do still think that Scorbunny is just striking that balance of cute and cool. And while Go having one may influence things, I do still think that Scorbunny is a little cutie. And then for Phalanx, I think you figured it out by now that I really like fighting type Pokemon. And Phalanx is just really cool. I remember after completing these games, the trial that I went through to find a Phalanx, find one with its hidden ability. I don't remember if I actually got a shiny. I don't think I ever did. But honestly, just the fact that it looks really cool, really neat typing, really cool signature move by the way. It's just really cool all around. And it's a design that hasn't really been done. Because like you could argue Execute is like this where it's a bunch of mons. But just the fact that it's lined up like a Phalanx formation is really cool. And finally, we're at Generation 9. And without a moment to spare, here is the last group of Pokemon for Generation 9. And these are my 3. If you've seen anything on my channel, I feel like a few of these aren't a surprise, especially with a lot of generations. Infernape was a given. I feel like Hattrem was a given if you watched any of my videos. And the same with Tinkaton. It's just a Pokemon that's taken the internet by storm, and with good reason. It's just a little gremlin that just smashes things with a hammer. It is really cool. Like other mons, I do kind of wish it was better competitively, but I think the fact that it isn't is kind of good, because otherwise you run into a problem like Incineroar has, where people may like the design, but the fact that it's overused in the competitive format may hurt it a little bit. And for Floragato, it's just really cool. Sprigatito wasn't a mon that I was really keen on using. Meowscarada is a little bit weird for me. And while I will say that I was on the Fuecoco bandwagon, I think that Floragato completely demolishes anything in the Fuecoco line. It may be because of Horizon showing Floragato in a more positive light, and Fuecoco in a more dim-witted, stupid sort of light where he's always hungry. That may be it. And then we have the big boy, Annihilape. He is really sick. I don't remember where I placed him, but I do think that Annihilape is certainly up there in my top 5 cross-gen evolutions. Because I did want to make my list varied, and initially I had Primeape on my Generation 1 list, but I felt like it would be better to save it for Annihilape, so I'm not talking about the same mon 2 times. But Annihilape is just sick. The Pokédex entries, the design, the fact that he looks like he does much Super Saiyan, it's all really amazing. And a really wicked typing at that. But those are my top 3 Pokemon of every generation. Obviously, if something Gen 10 gets announced, I'll be discussing that at a future time. But for the current generations we have, those are my 3 favorites. And these may change, but they also may stay the same. That's the good part about making videos like this, that if my tastes change, I can always make another video about it later. But regardless of what happens on Pokemon Day, can we all just agree to be civil and behave and be courteous towards each other? No? Okay, I figured not. It was worth a try. But I hope you have a great Pokemon Day, and I'll see you next time. Momentai.